and welcome back again to our Digital Health Off the Record podcast. The podcast where we will discuss the latest clinical technology trends, news, and share our unfiltered insights. My name is Edwin Cohen from Flow, and one of the co-hosts together with.
Hi, I'm Farrell from Optitrial, and today we're going to tackle eConsent, which is a ever-growing but still ever-challenging area when it comes to all things clinical technology. So, Edwin, what is eConsent to you from your experience?
Yes, well, first of all, eConsent is something that I've been dealing with for a while and advocating for. I will continue to advocate for, although, as you rightly said, it's not at the state where I think everyone would like it to be, but and is something that is continued to be deprioritized, what we see in the industry, at least, if you compare it to ECOA. So there's still a long way to go. Just wanted to get that cleared. So what's eConsent? So eConsent in I don't think there's a proper definition, but for describing it, it's, you could say, digitizing the consenting process and the consent information within clinical trials. That will be my sort of high level take on this. Would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, I think, for me, it's how do we modernize things? Because if you look at every other industry, can you name one place in a commercial setting where you're given a stack of paper and said, here, have a read through this, and before we'll set you up a new account, let's say banking or anything like that? So I think it is that kind of digitization process. And as well for me, because it can come in different flavors. For me, something that eConsent isn't, it shouldn't just be here's a stack of papers now in a PDF with just an e-signature. I think it has the potential, and the real benefits come from when you go much more under the surface and don't just convert the piece of paper. So what's the key benefits that you've seen from the implementations that you've been working on?
Yeah, I think there are so many different benefits, and obviously the most important one is it's benefiting patients, or it should benefit patients. And if it's benefiting patient, it will benefit sites and it will benefit sponsors eventually on the long run. The challenge though is that the ROI for this, it's long. It's like I haven't seen, and I don't see a lot of companies sharing the financial time savings if you would introduce an e-consent. And this is maybe at the same time a challenge to the industry. We need to do this much better, get the insights, get the real sort of data in place showing that there are so many advantages. But for the benefits, it's about ensuring that patients better understand what they're signing up for. And there are multiple ways of doing this. And the good thing about having it digital is that we can have animations embedded into the content that we share. And we know there's so much research out there that show that information sticks much better if you share it like this. And still we continue to give them written format. And obviously we need to address both, because not everyone wants to look at multimedia. But to me, the digital format, and this is the benefit, we should be able to provide the information tailored to the participant's needs. So if the patient wants to have it printed, the platform or the solution should be able to allow for that, or read it in a different format, those kind of things. So that's one of the benefits. Knowledge testing, like, does the patient really understand what they just read? And we know that they don't go through everything. But at least we are more confident that they have a fair understanding. And these are, if they don't understand it well enough, we see a higher dropout. So that's where the benefits for the sponsor will be looking at just one of the capabilities. Last thing that I want to mention is audit trail traceability around the process. So consenting process or the consent is not just the document that you digitize. You need to digitize the workflow that is associated with consenting. And it starts with introduction, sending patients back home, giving them sufficient time, then asking questions, going back and forward, sharing that information. So that whole workflow, so to say, needs to be supported. And we can all trace this now. Whereas with paper, it's a whole black box. We hand over a paper document, and we as sponsors only see, as the CRAs, we only see a final signed document, which is interestingly still highly accepted.
I know, right? And yeah, I think going back to what you were mentioning about ROI, so I think it's hard to define a return on investment given that, it's a fundamental to clinical trials that you capture consent, which, the same argument, I have it on paper, which is always the case, why should I change? But I think you really touched on some of the other things because ultimately the return on investment it's not going to be a hard benefit. It's more of a on the softer side. So things like, you know, ultimately, if the patient is more understanding of what's in the trial, are they going to stay in the trial longer? Because then it becomes, okay, how much is the cost of finding a new patient, or, what is the cost of losing a patient to follow up, which isn't necessarily going to show up on a nice fancy dashboard, but it's a more of a reality when it comes to
Yeah.
it. And I also think it's, as with anything, when you digitize information, it becomes powerful, and then that data can then do the work. So the other side of it is if you've got any optional consents, that you have the ability to get value out of those. So as an example, if you've got some optional consents for, uh, reusing any of the tissue samples for future research, or, using their data as part
Mhm.
of like a AI modeling.
Yeah.
So if that's stuck on a piece of paper in a site, you're
Yeah.
not going to be able to
Mm.
very easily like decide whether they've given consent or not, which
Yeah.
means ultimately, ethically, you should not.
Yeah. No,
And
I think this topic is really interesting because what a lot of people, and I need to say, I wasn't aware about any of this when I was a CRA or working as a project manager. So I only became aware of this when I sort of owned the consenting process. But there are so many upstream implications around the wording that goes into the consent form, and it has to do with data. So, like the data that you collect, but also the samples that are associated with this. And there are, as you said, hidden costs around this. And that is, I believe, I don't hear anyone talking about these kind of things, which is strange in a way, because they are all associated to the consent. And I dare to say that this document and its associated process is one of the most complex ones that we have within clinical trials. And as you also rightly said, it's one of probably the most important documents that we have, because without a signed document, we can't do anything. And so, in my mind, it doesn't resonate. So, it's the most important document. It's impacting a lot. And if there are issues with it, it has huge implications, but we are not spending enough time to revisit this document and the process to make it all work. Yeah.
exactly. So, what what is that process look like typically when it comes to maybe starting, how do you get to this is the consent form? So starting with like paper, because I presume you must start getting to paper before you adapt digitally.
Yeah, I would say the future is if you want to get to an e-consent fully adopted, you need to start thinking digitally already. But I can understand that that requires a complete change ways of working from the business. So, but I would say if you step by step digitize the whole process, then yes, you have a dependency on how the consent form is developed internally within each organization, and they all treat it differently. But in the last couple of years, the industry has not proven that they are better in writing really good consent forms. The conference that we have attended recently, people still call out they're too complex, too lengthy, too scientifically. AI is not going to help directly with that. I do see the solution, AI helping there, but not a patient utilizing AI to use that data to make it more understandable.
You're saying that you're not meant to try and get as many pages of a consent form as possible, which is it's very surprising because a lot of the times consent forms can easily be 50 plus pages that the patient is expected to go through, which I know for me, for certain, you get your terms and conditions. If we're being honest, how often are people going to start skimming through everything? And they can be
Yeah.
much shorter.
Yeah, no, and sort of, I'm critical to us as the industry because we are making a mess and we're not making a patient's life easier here. But I would like to call out to regulatory authorities actually as well, because they are still the ones who are approving those consent forms to be used in the studies, and they've got every right to say and give pushback saying, hey, you developed a consent form for this particular study. How on earth do you expect them to understand this 40-page document? But I don't see that happening as well. Whereas I believe that they are in the position to really push back on that. So that's something that I'm hoping for as well.
Maybe it's an interesting concept, but maybe a challenge to that. Is it maybe because it makes sense to regulatory authority people because they see these in and out and they know the science, they know all this and that. They're not like a layperson that doesn't understand anything about clinical trials. So is it something that you'd need to find somebody who knows nothing to be able to
Yeah.
say, I understand this?
Yeah, no, but well, as I can speak for at least the Netherlands, in every ethical committee or IAB, there needs to be a lay person or someone who's not scientifically um, familiar. So
Hmm?
we've got those people already there. But again, it's about and how do you interpret it ICH GCP? And it doesn't detail out the level and the details that need to go into that information. Obviously, if you, and this is what's happening, people have a checklist of these are the ICH GCP requirements and the things that need to go into a consent form. We can check all the boxes. So we fulfill GCP, so we can use this.
Hmm.
But then, yeah, I don't believe in yeah, sort of this getting us to the right outcome. So therefore, what I'm saying is it's it's a complex problem, and it's not only the industry and the sponsors who need to deal with this. I think everyone who plays a role within this process, who has something to say, needs to be critically looking at their own sort of roles and responsibilities and make a difference there.
Hmm. So I guess it starts with you need to make make consent in general just to simplify in the industry. So let's say we've got to okay, we've made a like 10-page document that's I
Mhm,
don't know, it's very easy to comprehend. It's got like a readability level
mhm,
for
mhm.
I don't know, 12-year-old, let's say, as an
Yeah.
example. So what comes next when it comes to turning that into eConsent?
Yeah, you need to have the proper structure to digitize this. And I Although I am really in favor of all the animated content, it is a huge lift to get this to a level where you can repeatedly update this information, provide this, and so forth. So it's an expertise, this type of content management. I'm calling this content management. So it's the consent content that you digitize and animate. That also requires investments and thinking about things differently, because how the industry is handling this traditionally is they produce a consent form, hand it over to an agency, they create stuff, setting to the costs, push it back for the first time. But then if you have an amendment, you need to revisit it, change it, update, revisit, and repost it again. So it's not a very lean process. So if you talk about what needs to be done, something to consider for sure.
So maybe I mean, at this stage, there's so many different types of generative AI, including, creating of video content, sound content, everything.
Yeah.
Is that not an area that could be streamlined now in future where, you can, as long as you have the creation done quick and then
Yeah.
you just go more for the review side of things?
Yeah, no, definitely. No, I think AI should definitely help us in sort of creating the type of documents, the information, understanding the workflow and the implications. And the tools need to become flexible to address as many situations as possible. So you've got like on-site consenting and sometimes in case of emergency, but so this is where having ample time to think about the study is not always that can vary between 1 hour up to like 2 or 3 weeks. So a system needs to be able to accommodate this, but also for legal representatives or sharing this information with your family, not that they are part of the signature process, but something for the people to discuss with. And you need to be able to support all of those type of use cases. And I do believe that if you build your products with the right infrastructure, you should be able to do so. I don't think the
Mm.
tech is going to be the problem. It's really understanding the different sort of workflows and options that we just need to build accordingly.
Absolutely, because I think on top of that, like there's so many more benefits that you could really, I suppose, take advantage of when you digitize. Because, for example, with anything to do with digital accessibility, if people are poorly sighted or they have any other like disability to go with it, you can account for those, and they may already have accounted for those on their personal device. Something that I talk about a lot, but you know, you give a stack of papers and it's printed in, like size 12 font or whatever. If a person is not
Mm.
very is partially sighted or whatever, they might have reading glasses, but are you going to give them a magnifying glass to go with it as well? How do you
Yeah.
make sure that you're accounting for or being
Mm.
patient centric when it comes to that? And similarly, you know, thinking about who's going to be the patients of today, tomorrow as well. Can you imagine giving a stack of paper to somebody younger from the TikTok generation that all they do is consume
Yeah.
information digitally?
Yeah. No, I agree. I like this though. I haven't really thought about how the consent form would look like if you utilize these type of platforms. So in TikTok sound bites,
Hmm.
interesting thing to think and ideate about maybe in the future. But yeah, I totally agree with you. You need to, not you, but we really need to rethink and reimagine how this needs to work in the future because it's not sustainable.
Hmm. Absolutely. And you touched upon, the workflows and everything, and you mentioned as well sort of the cycles that consent forms go through, because surprise, surprise, in our industry, you don't just stay with protocol version 1, which you base your master consent on. So what happens when it comes to, you've updated a protocol, you need to update consent form because of the reasons. So what happens, or what can eConsent enable when it comes to that?
Yeah, you're touching upon the ICF amendments that on average take place 3 to 4 times per study. So any change in protocol could end up in an ICF change, only the impact is a little bit bigger because you need to reconsent. And also there, it's not always understood, like what's the timing of reconsenting. And hence in the countries and on site level, there's no oversight on who signed which version, when it was signed on time. And when you've got this all digital, you can have it, I'm going to say now, relatively easy to push out to all patients. And I'm going to say relatively easy because of most of the platforms require a final approved consent form to be digitized and made available in the platform. And that's why I mentioned if you've got this whole process all digitized from the start, once it's approved, it's directly available in your platform. That's
Hmm.
in my ideal world how it should look like. So this is exactly where the benefits are. So patients are informed much quicker, assuming that the content has approved or has been sort of not approved but improved. Um, and we can see where um, patients are missing out on signatures, for example. So you would reduce the number of protocol deviations, and maybe this is a trigger for early dropout, because if they don't sign on time, they lose sort of their connection with studies. So it
Hmm.
has, like, we didn't touch upon this on the benefits, but another benefit for the study for sure.
Yeah, and I think maybe to tie back to something you mentioned as a benefit earlier about like it being fully audit trailed. So I guess, and as well, if you think about you could set this up for quality by design, I imagine that I've seen it from both sides. There probably are quite a number of protocol deviations that come from, somebody didn't sign their reconsent on time
Yeah,
and they were continuing. So
yeah,
I imagine that could save on a ton of protocol deviations if the workflow is specific
yeah,
to, and you have the full trail of, like
yeah.
you said, when people have signed as well.
Yeah, yeah. On that actually though, well, not this, but linking it to sort of signing it electronically, the concerns that I've heard, and I don't sometimes really understand this, is that yeah, but if we give it digitally, they are able to sign it at home, and they're like, yeah, but who guarantees that the patient who signed it is really sort of the patient who is participating? And no one is asking these type of questions when it comes to paper.
Exactly.
With
And
Nico, we
why?
touched upon this as well, and
Yeah.
maybe I'm not as smart and I don't see those things, but I honestly I don't understand that.
I know it's one of those cases that, well, how can you prove anything, right? So,
Yes, and the standards and the require what we expect digital to do, that it's going to be 100% compliant, is it's like there. And when it comes to like the normal ways, we lower the bar, for example. So we demand more from it being digital all of a sudden, which I think is really interesting.
yeah, and I think that's probably a good closing thought that, we always hold new innovative solutions to a higher regard than we do the existing, which, yeah, I can't imagine how many of the medications that, have been approved years and years and years ago are being held up to the same level of scrutiny as today's are.
Agree. I think that's a good call out, and for closure. Like any other type of podcast and topic that we're addressing, I expect that we will take a deeper dive into one or the other components of eConsent. So yeah, looking forward to those sessions as well.
Absolutely. And make sure as well you join us next time where we're going to continue the journey into all things that are promoting patient centricity and helping patients. We're going to take a look at quite an important topic. It's how do you incorporate patient feedback into your study design? So quite an important one, especially, where patients are at the center and should be at the center of all clinical trials, especially as they're the ones that are living with the condition. So it'll be quite an interesting discussion, I feel.
Yes, looking forward to it. So I want to say for all the listeners, thank you for listening. I think you know where to find the podcast by now, but if you forget, just look at LinkedIn. And yeah, if you haven't done so, sign up, like, and follow, and definitely share. Eager to hear your thoughts. Thanks for this time.
Right. Thank you. Bye.